My next question is your collaboration with Seattle company Pol.is is really Pol.is is very innovative, and then it is like a real-time visualization of the democracy. And since we run the machine learning hackathon community here in Tokyo, we are very interested in your insights. So what did you find by data analysis in people's opinion discussion? And then that will lead us to the next generation politics system. And then we should do the same here in Japan, I think.
Yeah, we use Pol.is from everything to, do with the open mountaineering, that's the hiking, to the opening up the oceans, that's like sea sports and so on, and to diplomatic conversations like with the de facto US Embassy, the AIT, on the digital dialogues, and pretty much everything, right? There's even a website, Pol.is.gov.tw, that is our locally hosted instance. So it's very much ingrained into our institution already. And the best thing I found about Pol.is is that it's AI in the 20th century. It's not AI in the 21st century, what with deep learning and so on, because it's actually much harder to explain the results if you use 21st century AI. If it's just 20th century AI, in Pol.is it's mostly principal component analysis, mostly k-means clustering. These are ideas that even for a primary schooler, if you take some time to explain through the concepts, they can verify it themselves. But if you used any of those cutting edge like transformer models of deep learning, explaining it is actually very, very difficult. And so I think it helps to build data competence, that is to say, a self-confidence in producing and analyzing data instead of just consuming the results of a data analysis. It's like media competence is the ability to produce media versus media literacy, which is just about viewing or reading media. It's important to start small, to start with well understood techniques like the 20th century AI, and then build confidence in all the participants' ability to not only replicate the results, but also do their independent analysis. And then maybe you can add some more like deep learning as an assistant, for example, smart categorization and so on. But these are nice to have. The core functionality, I think, must be very accountable, that's to say easy to explain, and also value aligned, meaning that it serves the best interest of the person using it.
Okay, thank you very much. The counter question about that comment is, I think the beauty of the power of the machine learning is finding counterintuitive fact. So did you find any counterintuitive fact in analyzing people's opinion?
Definitely. Yeah, the main Pol.is insight, which is surprising to pretty much everyone participating, is that actually people agree mostly with each other's points most of the time on most of the issues. And it's very counterintuitive because people have already been exposed to the more anti-social social media, which wastes people time just going through the ideologically charged controversial issues. But in each social topic, these controversial ideologies are maybe just a few points. If you just say, okay, we agree to disagree, but then there's much more that we agree. For example, when UberX came to Taiwan, everybody agreed on the insurance, taxation, the fairness principle, registration, and so on. And while, of course, people may differ on what constitutes a sharing economy, some people think, you're not even carpooling, that's not sharing economy. But some people think, oh, it's sharing economy if there is a platform that does matchmaking of the idle hours of cars and so on. If you get caught up in those ideologies, of course, the society goes nowhere. But counterintuitively, Pol.is shows that we actually agree on those rough consensus or those common values after all. So why don't we just regulate those? And then we can talk about those abstract concepts that are controversial later.
Okay, so do you think eventually optimization of the policies can be done based on the data science?
Yeah, definitely. I think data science offers a very rare but important glimpse, which is much more holistic to the entire society. A lot of the difficulty that we have when talking about like climate change, disinformation crisis, COVID, whatever, is that because the problem space and solution space is so large, it's very difficult to hold them in one's mind. So one would oversimplify. And once people oversimplify, but in different ways, it creates ideological differences, even though their value may be the same. And so data science can give a holistic, like dimensional reduction, right? It shows a interactive portrait of the actual problem space without oversimplifying to or only one or two dimensions.
Mm-hmm. So, do you have any other example of the fact you found in the policy and then made it as a policy? Or,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So, for example, when we did a consultation with the AIT, the de facto U.S. embassy, on promoting people-to-people ties in like across the world. There's a very controversial statement that says, and I quote, Taiwan should make English an additional working language. Even France have done the same, unquote. And it was very controversial. People don't like it, but there's also people who really like it. But the statement with the most consensus is that we need to prepare our education environment so that in due time, people will feel comfortable speaking native English. And so basically it's the same statement, but set in the future. Like for people who are in kindergarten, we need to prepare so that 10 years, 15 years down the line, they feel comfortable thinking in English. And now everybody agrees with that. And so I think this is important to realize that if you set far enough to the future, if you are patient enough, something that looks like a very controversial topic may actually get everybody's support. And of course, we develop our bilingual nation strategy based on that insight.
Do you think eventually data science can pick the weak voice in the society?
If we design to do so, of course.
Okay, thank you. My next question is, according to Gov0 team, your Cofacts is one of the most active repository in the GitHub. And in this platform, people can crowdsource a fact-check the rumors. It can be done in 60 minutes as an average. And then this could stop infodemic under COVID-19. And then how did you come up with this idea? And then how can we expand this open source plus crowdsourcing idea for other use cases and eventually the other countries?
Yeah, the Cofacts team have already spread, for example, to the Chulalongkorn University where we had a workshop. And if you remove the S and go just to cofact.org, it actually goes to the Thai version in Thailand of the Cofacts repository. And so it has already seen a lot of adoption around the world, and especially in Thailand, which is very nice. But I cannot speak on behalf of the co-founder, Johnson Liang, who really goes by the nickname MRORZ, Mr. ORZ, is actually the main mastermind behind this chatbot and also the main contributor for the first version of the Cofacts. Of course, now it's a very large team. So I would encourage you to maybe ask Johnson. I mean, here is his GitHub repository and his contact details, and maybe he can share the full story because I'm just a promoter of Cofacts, but I'm not part of the team that started Cofacts.
Okay, I will definitely do so. Yeah, thank you very much. My next question is a little technical. You are known as a programming wizard, and then my Taiwanese engineer, who's actually working for the GitLab Taiwan, and says you can write 200 lines of code and can build amazing performance application. So what are top 3 key points when writing effective code?
Well, first of all, it helps to write it with the community. If I write just the bare bones without design, graphics, favorite icons, and so on, but I do it in the open, and I say, I know looks ugly, but send me pull requests, then everybody can contribute. And that's really the main key point, is to work out loud instead of working in isolation. The second thing also helps, that you identify the project's social good in the very beginning. So even before you write the first line of code, think about your README, think about your tagline, think about your project name and hashtag, and how to communicate the social good of your project to any random stranger so that they will be motivated to contribute to the code base. And third, always, instead of asking people to sign a lot of consent forms and so on before contributing, just give them the capability to contribute. That's radical trust. And it's always easy nowadays that you can revert their changes if it turns out their changes doesn't make sense. But asking for permission is much more difficult than asking for forgiveness, right? If people can just go and change and say, oh, sorry, forgive me, I got it wrong, I made a typo or whatever, it's no big deal. But if everybody have to ask your permission, then you become the bottleneck for the project. And so by relieving yourself of the bottleneck, you can delegate away even the delegation to other people.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. And then your way of using radical trust is really interesting. What's the main difference between radical trust and trust?
Yeah, radical trust means that we give the right to commit. For example, when I was working on nowadays called Raku, but back in the time, the Pugs implementation, I give commit bits, that's to say the right to push into the shared repository, not only to people working on Perl and Haskell, but also Guido van Rossum, the creator of Python, why not? And even when someone, flames, like writes some toxic language about Perl on any of the forums, we often just reply saying, hey, here is a commit bit. You can contribute and make it better. It even evolved so that when there was a committer who was just giving birth to one of their child, we immediately gave the child a commit bit too, even though they're just newborn. And so basically, it's like Wikipedia, right? Anyone with an IP address can change our code, and we can figure out the forgiveness later if they've made some bad changes.
Okay, great. Similarly, lots of people in Japan and maybe globally wants to become an engineer, IT engineer this time because of the maybe bad economy. IT engineer can be highly paid and then can work remotely, regardless of the place. So, do you have any message to encourage this kind of newbie or wannabe engineers?
Yeah, I think in Taiwan, we don't call it software engineering. We call it program design. And it's the same thing, but it conveys a different idea. When you call it engineering, you think of someone who interacts mostly with machines. But if you call it a designer, that's someone who mostly interacts with other people. And so, of course, a real programming work involves working with people and working with machines, of course. And whatever code you write must be readable by machines, but also readable by humans. And so there's two sides of this job. I'm not saying that there's only one side, but since you're talking about software engineers, I would like to encourage them to not forget about the design part. Computational thinking, scientific thinking is great, but also design thinking. Learn about how to explore the various different values that people have, how to define a common value out of the diversity, how to develop according to various different prototypes concurrently, and how to deliver the final work, and also allow other people to deliver their version of their work, and that's design thinking.
Okay, thank you very much. So how can typical, because for example, one of the typical backend or machine learning engineer do not learn designing, then how can they learn designing without being a designer?
Yeah, I mean, design thinking is not about being a professional designer. This is just about working through this iterative process to how to understand your fellow human beings and how to define those challenges and redefine problems and create innovative solutions. And if you can learn programming by going to, I don't know, Stack Exchange or whatever forum that people are having such a conversation, I'm sure that you can also browse, for example, the Interaction Design Foundation's description about design thinking and find the references and join the communities. I mean, design thinking always starts with an idea. And this idea is often just part of your life, right? You can see something that you want to see done better, and then it reaches you, and then you can reach to other people asking whether there are some other issues that you also want to solve in that vein. And that is the basis of interaction design, and that will then teach a different lens of problem solving. So if you're interested, I just pasted the interactiondesign.org's beginner's guide. You don't have to follow all the lessons, but that outline shows what's the learning path about design thinking, and you can start from a user experience perspective, from a user interface perspective, a front-end developer perspective, a user researcher perspective. There's many different entry points into the learning path of design thinking.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. And I'm also a big fan of design thinking, but my biggest learning today is what we are saying is design thinking except UI UX design exists. In case of machine learning, in case of backend, everything can be designed. Right? Okay.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. Mechanism design, market design, service design, everything can apply the design thinking too.
Okay, thank you very much. My very last question is, everyone praises your achievement mask supply application and its data visualization. So technically speaking, public API and the open data are essential to build it. So in your ICFP keynote, you said someone from Korea contacted you, but they couldn't make it. They couldn't build the same application in Korea. So we do not have a pharmacy open data API either. So how can other countries, for example, government or big company, proceed this open data movement? For example, persuading big company to provide more public API or allocating the budget to support civic tech hackathon.
Yeah, first of all, I was referring to early February, where we did the API for Taiwanese pharmacies. And at the time, of course, the Korean people do not yet have the open API. But what's amazing is that Finjen Kyung from Tainan City, part of the GovZero Slack channel, shared the API that he had with the people in Korea. And so, for example, the Seoul City, quickly, well, not that quickly, but eventually around March, set up such a API and followed by other cities as well. And so I think it's just a few weeks time. I think by mid-March, they do have a mask availability map going in their mask rationing system. And I also met the developers over video conference. Some of them are just like 15 years old, so it's excellent. And so what happens, I think, at that time is that the Korean government were seeing that there is a need, but they do not have an example. And what the civic technologists can show is that once you use the API, then instead of coding anything from scratch, the map that Finjen Kyung made in Tainan City can immediately work also as a map for the Seoul City, even though Finjen Kyung doesn't speak Korean, but he speaks JavaScript. That's the important thing, right? And so I think that enabled a real collaboration. In Japan, there's a very similar story about the code for Japan, people who work with the Tokyo metropolitan government to work on the Stop COVID dashboard. And again, because they work out in the open, the GovZero people also helped on the internationalization and localization. And I personally also help translating it. So as long as it's open, it's on GitHub, I think there's no boundaries. It's not just people in Korea or people in Taiwan or people in Japan. Everybody who speaks JavaScript can co-design the API, and the government basically accepts whatever work is there, and then basically it's like a reverse procurement where the government only have to guarantee the stability of the API, but doesn't have to do anything else.
Okay. Did you get any requests from other countries regarding mask application, pharmacy API?
Yeah, definitely. And many people are seeing it not as something that they can just copy, but rather a model like the Taiwan model, where they can engage the civil society, the social sector, who do not previously understand that they can also make government digital services. For example, on the Stop COVID dashboard in Tokyo, I think all what the Tokyo people do in the metropolitan government is basically giving them a domain name that is a government, but the actual link is still to GitHub, and the GitHub is the main place where people do the pull requests and so on, and that means that it's made in the world. It's just given a Tokyo metropolitan domain name, and then of course it's forked into many other cities as well.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. That's all for my questions, and thank you very much for answering.